What's up everybody, I'm Matt Gary, and on this episode of Coding with the Force, we're going to go over some best practices when setting up profiles, permission sets, and permission set groups in Salesforce. Alright guys, so just like with every other video I do, the first thing I want to do is explain why it's so important to take the time to set up your profiles, permission sets, and permission set groups as best as you can, at least, in your Salesforce org. The reason that these, your profiles and your permission sets and your permission set groups are so important to set up and to really take the time to think about and work through is because they determine such a critical aspect of security in your org. They determine what a user can do for, on an object. So they determine the object permissions for a user or group of users. And I know a lot of people get confused as to whether, what object permissions are as opposed to record visibility permissions. I know that's very confusing for a lot of people. So I'm going to try to explain that really quick. If you want a user to be able to see the account object up here, then you would provide that visibility to the account object on their profile or a permission set they were assigned. If you wanted a user to be able to create or update or delete individual records on this object, then you would need to determine that access in a profile or permission set. But what this doesn't do, what profiles and permission sets do not do, is determine the individual records that a user has access to. So my user being able to see this account called Edge Communications, that is not at all determined by a profile or a permission set, except for in extraordinarily rare cases that I'm not going to go over because it's just going to confuse things. But there are rare cases where you can determine that on a profile, but it's typically only for administrators. Anyway, let's move past that. Aside from those rare scenarios, profiles and permission sets do not determine whether or not you can view individual records on an object. So it does not determine whether or not I can view, that I can see this particular record. It does determine whether or not I can see the account object at all. It does determine whether or not I can see the individual fields on the account object. So for instance, if I didn't want my user to see this rating field, I could go into my profile or permission sets and uncheck access to the rating field, and then my user would no longer be able to see it. So everything else would remain on the page layout except for this. But it doesn't allow me to view each individual record. Viewing each individual record on an object is determined by things that determine record level access, which are sharing rules, roles, the territory hierarchy model, organization-wide defaults, things along those lines. Profiles and permission sets do not do this, except for in extraordinarily rare and sparingly used cases. Okay, so now that we have an understanding, I hope, of what profiles and permission sets are used for, let's go over how you set these up these days. Okay, now 14 months ago, if I was making this video just 14 months ago, my recommendation here would be completely different because things have changed, as they often do in Salesforce. Historically, what you would do if you had a group of users, typically over 50 to 100 users, is you'd have brand new profiles for those users. So And that's challenging. It's very challenging to maintain because unlike permission sets and permission set groups, a profile is a one-to-one thing. You set up a user and you can only assign one profile to that user. Alternatively, for permission sets and permission set groups, you can assign many of those to a user. So we'll go over that in a minute. But for instance, say I had a sales group that already existed in my org, and I had set up a profile for them, and that sales group was like a couple hundred people, and everything's going fine for them. But now a marketing team wants to come in, and that marketing team also wants access to all the things in the sales cloud or in the sales team's profile because they need access to it. And but they'd also like access to a handful of other marketing objects that the sales team doesn't use. So, popular marketing objects are things like campaigns and campaign members and stuff like that. So you have to then go and create, pending your marketing group is bigger than, somewhere between 50 and 100 users. What you would typically see done is you create a brand new profile. You clone this sales profile and you make the marketing profile, and then you add object access to each object. Cool, but that's really hard to maintain because then what happens is you get more and more groups that come in, and you create a series of custom objects for them. So, who knows, maybe you have a service organization that comes on, and the service organization needs access to all the sales and the marketing stuff so that they can properly serve customer cases that come in. And so then you have to create a third profile, and then it just, it kind of spirals out of control. You have tons of different profiles that you have to maintain. And that can be really challenging to do. Now, alternatively, what you can do that makes this whole thing quite a bit easier these days, as of around 14 months ago now, is you can set up what are called permission set groups and add permission sets to them. So, why would you go this route? Well, if you go the permission set route, what that allows you to do is, you've got your marketing users and you've got your sales users, and you want you want your marketing users to have access to both the sales objects and the marketing objects. So historically, the reason that you didn't, actually, we'll get there in a second. Let me just cover this part first. So you've got a group of marketing users and you've got a group of sales users, and the marketing users want access to both the marketing objects and the sales objects. So what you can do is you can just create one permission set for marketing user object access, and you can create another permission set with sales object access. And then you can create permission set groups where you just reference those same permission sets in different combinations. So we've created two permission sets, and now we want to make permission set groups. So I've got this marketing user permission set group and a sales user permission set group. And if we open them up, what we can see is the marketing permission set group has both the marketing user objects permission set and the sales objects permissions, whereas the sales group just has the sales object permissions. And what this allows you to do is really kind of condense all of your permissions. So you've only really got to create them once. You've got to create them in one place and update them in one place. And then you can assign them to, you can assign a permission set to multiple permission set groups. So as you can see, it's kind of like, if you're a developer modularizing your code. You're able to modularize your permissions into these nice compact forms and then just kind of reuse them wherever you need them, so you're not having to, you know, what you'll see in a lot of orgs historically is they end up growing and then they make 50 or 60 profiles. And then what happens, when you decide that we should take away 6 fields on this particular object for every single profile. Well, you have to go into every profile and update all of the remove the field access for all 50 profiles and then save it. And then you've got to move that up your org chain, which I can tell you, if you've never moved a profile through a change set or CI/CD process, it is a nightmare, especially when you compare them to permission sets. So this makes CI/CD and stuff a whole lot easier too, but I'm not going to go into that because that'll just complicate this whole conversation. But as you can see, with the permission sets and permission set groups, what you can now do is you can have, if I needed to update the demo sales object access permission set, which is in both of these, I can just go to this one permission set, update that, and then it'll propagate to all of the permission set groups this is in, which makes everything 1,000 times easier. So, you might be asking yourself, why has this changed in the last 14 months? Why wasn't this always a thing? Well, historically, Salesforce didn't give you permission set groups. They're relatively new. And the drawback to making individual permission sets as opposed to permission set groups is that these could balloon out of control, right? You would have to, these would likely be broken down into even more modular groups. So it would be like, campaign edit access, campaign view access for each of these permission sets. And then, if there were hundreds or thousands of users on your platform that needed access to campaigns or something, then you'd have to assign every individual permission set that they needed. And, if you think about that, it's possible, right? It's possible that you'd have a user with hundreds of permission sets assigned to them, which isn't really ideal. But with permission set groups, you can group all these permission sets into nice chunks. In fact, what is recommended is you take a look at your roles that you're going to set up in your system and produce permission set groups based on those roles. So the roles typically are kind of aligned to user function in the system to an extent if you're setting them up how you should, which we're not going over in this video, but I promise I'll get to one soon. But permission set groups, now you can kind of manage that all inside of permission set group, and your permission set groups are much you can just assign, one permission set group to a user that encompasses everything that they need for their role in your system. So, to make a long story short, historically, profiles were the king of object permissions, but they came with a lot of drawbacks. If you needed to change access to things across all your profiles, it could be painful, extremely painful to deal with. And moving them through CI/CD pipelines and using them in unlocked packages these days also can be an extraordinary pain. But because of the way that permission set groups allow you to modularize your permission sets and reuse them in a bunch of different places and kind of group them to make, more modular object permissions, it's best if you create now enough permission sets to do what you need to do, and then group them based on the roles in your org that are going to be set up. Anyway, so these days, permission set groups are in your best interest. And I don't just say that because, I mean, it's really true. I also say it because Salesforce produced this article themselves that said introducing the next generation of user management permission set groups. And down here at the very bottom, while they're not going to do it anytime soon, maybe not in the next 3 years even, at some point they're probably going to deprecate profiles completely and move to permission sets and permission set groups. I don't know when that'll be. I'm not going to theorize on it. Could be a very long time, but at some point it'll happen. So it's in your best interest to kind of move to these things for a bunch of different reasons. Number one, at some point, probably going to be deprecated. Number two, it's going to allow you to update your permissions in an easier, more modular way. And number three, if you're looking to kind of automate your deployment pipeline, I can tell you from an unlock package and Scratch org perspective and a CI/CD pipeline perspective, it's quite a bit easier to move permission sets through that chain than it is a whole bunch of profiles. So, long story short, permission set groups. You should align them to roles in your Salesforce org. You should create permission sets as granular as you need them, and assign them to permission set groups, and then assign those permission set groups to your appropriate users. Now, there's still one more question, right, that you're thinking to yourself, which is, well, you still have to assign a profile, and there's a couple things that profiles do that permission sets don't. And you are correct. What is suggested, or what I would suggest these days, is there is a profile called I believe it's like the minimum access profile or something like that. Minimum access Salesforce profile. What I suggest these days, if you can take the time to do it, is for every user that needs, or every user type that needs a different. Okay, let me explain a couple things. There are 3 major things that profiles do that permission sets cannot do. There's login IP ranges, login session settings, and there are record types and page layouts assignments. Permission sets can't do those things, at least as of today. Only profiles can do those. So you still have to manage those very small things within your profiles. So for every grouping of users that needs different page layouts given to them or different IP and login ranges, what I would do is take this minimum access Salesforce profile and clone it. And what that does is it basically gives you no access to every object, because you don't really, at this point, you don't really want your individual field access or your object level access determined by your profile anymore. That's not what you want. You want that all to be done with permission sets. So as you can see, it's easier to update those permissions going forward. Way easier. 1,000 times easier. But what you do want to do once you clone this minimum access Salesforce profile is you come in here to the account object or whatever other objects that you care about, and you want to set your profile and page layout assignments, and then your default record types and assigned record types. So that's what you'll do. That's honestly almost 100% of what you're going to do with a profile these days. Nothing else. Literally nothing else except for the login hours, if you have them and you care about them. Some orgs do. Most orgs I've worked in don't. But if you have users that you want to give login hours to, then you'll want to create profiles for them. And same thing for login IP ranges for each unique grouping of IP ranges for users. You'll want to set up profiles and add IP ranges for them. That's it, though. what you can see is that, you know, if that's all you're managing in a profile, profiles become like nothing, right? They're like nothing in comparison to what they used to be. You're just managing login hours, IP ranges, and then layouts, page layouts, and record types on them. It makes your whole life a lot easier, trust me. I have not been lucky enough to work yet in an org where I have been able to do these things, but I've experimented with them quite a bit over the last 6 to 7 months, and it really simplifies the way that you handle permissions in your org. So I hope that all this has made sense. I hope that this is helping somebody out there. I know this is a little confusing topic, but and it has changed drastically in the last year as compared to what it used to be for many, many years before that. So yeah, I'm hoping I'm not forgetting anything. I'm pretty sure that's everything. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure to subscribe. If you want to help the channel grow and become even better than it is, consider donating or buying a shirt or a cup or whatever else, or becoming a Patreon, because everything that you donate is going to go right back to you guys. I'm just going to reinvest that in this channel to create more videos, to have more people come on aside from myself to create these videos, etc. So that's it. If you have any ideas for videos, also let me know. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys next time.